Hi everyone, welcome to our 7th journaling class. I can't believe we've had this many online classes and we've come so far and done so many different things. I've really enjoyed teaching this online class. A couple of you have sent me pictures last week of what you're making in your journals, and it makes my day to see that you are really enjoying journaling at home and it's been sort of like an outlet for you, and I just love the photos. So please keep sending them my way because they make me really happy. This week we are doing a mini still life in our journals. A still life is when you use objects or any type of thing that is important to you, and you arrange it in a way to sort of tell a story. So when you're thinking about what things you want to use in your still life, make sure that they have a little bit of meaning to you. So look around your house. Maybe it's something that you've had for a really long time. Maybe it's something that you've collected from outside, something from school. Maybe it has something to do with a hobby that you do outside of school or a sport that you play. And I want you to put these objects together, maybe stick to like 3 to 5 objects and put them together and arrange them so that you like how they look together and create a composition. And then if you have like some form of light, that will play a part in how you draw your still life. So I'm going to turn the camera, show you what I used for my still life. You are going to use your journal obviously today. I've got a pencil and an eraser to practice sketching before I nail down my drawing. I've got a black pen. It doesn't matter what color pen you use. I'm just going to stick with black. I'm using a ruler to put a little frame around my still life, and then I've got my colored pencils that I'm going to be using to color my still life. And actually I just used this tiny little pencil sharpener that came in our pack, and it worked really well. So these little sharpeners rock. Let me show you what I'm using in my still life. So I've got this tiny little plant, and this one's actually a fake plant, but most of the plants in my house are real. I have a green thumb. I really like plants. I like to grow things inside and outside. So I've got this little plant to show that I really enjoy growing plants. This is a little ceramic heart dish with sea glass that I've been collecting this summer, and I've been planning to create something with all the sea glass that I've been creating or collecting this summer. So I'm not sure what it is I'm going to create yet, but it's kind of a project I've been working on. And then I've got this little watercolor painting that I bought from a friend, and it says, "Be kind whenever possible. It's always possible." So that is something that is important to me. I like the quote, and I like that a friend painted that for me. So what I'm going to start out by doing is, let me turn the camera towards my journal. You want to be able to set up your still life so that you can look at what you're drawing and go back to drawing, and look at it and go back to drawing, and make that transition easy for yourself. Today is just going to be a 1-page spread. So I'm going to grab my ruler and my black pen, and like I said, I'm going to create a little frame around my page with my ruler. So I'm going to start at 1/2 inch and go till 4.5 inches. So I started at 1/2 inch and I ended at 4.5 inches. Turn my book around. I'm lining up the bottom of my ruler with the edge of my journal. And I'm doing the same thing, 1/2 inch to 4.5 inches. So I'm creating just a tiny little rectangle for myself to put my drawing in. I don't know why I like to do this, but I've always done this. It just sort of gives me a place to put my drawing, and then maybe I want to do something with the outside after I'm done. Maybe I want to create a sort of border or frame around my still life. So I'm going to switch over to a pencil and look at my drawing. So I've got my little plant, and if you want to pause the video and go look around your house for things that you would like to use in your still life, that's totally fine. I'll try to give you some pointers for how to draw so that when you do go to draw, you can watch this, maybe draw with me and then do yours after, or whatever works for you. It's totally up to you. I'll just give you some ideas on how to draw a still life. So I've got this little light right here, and it just sort of puts shadows underneath my objects and gives me like a lot of clarity on what it is I'm drawing. So if you have a light on your desk or wherever it is that you work, it really helps. So I want to think about what is in the front first, because that is going to be drawn bigger and it's going to be drawn closer to the viewer. So when I'm drawing, let me point this down a little bit. See that I've got this heart-shaped ceramic dish, and I'm drawing really light till I get it right, which is what I say to my students. Just draw really uber lightly, because if you don't like how something came out and you want to get rid of it, it is a lot easier to get rid of those lines when you didn't push down too hard with your pencil. So I drew a little heart shape for my ceramic dish, and it's kind of at an angle, and I'm drawing super light, and then I'm adding these irregular lines. Irregular meaning they're not straight. And I'm adding these pieces of sea glass within my dish. And these shapes are funny looking because all of these pieces of sea glass are stacked on top of each other. So it's not really going to look like a heart when I'm done, because I've got all these weird looking things going on top and around, and from the viewer's point, they might not really know what they're looking at. And to me, I think that makes it a little bit more interesting, because instead of them looking at it and saying, oh, I get it, I know what I'm looking at, they kind of have to stare at it for a little bit longer to try to figure out what it is. So hopefully if I draw it well, they can figure out what it is I'm trying to show here. So I am adding these weird funky lines on this heart-shaped dish, and I'm just doing it with pencil for now. Once I'm done, if I want to, I can go ahead with my black pen and add some, go on top of my pencil lines, or I can just use colored pencil. So I've got my heart dish, and it's kind of funky looking because I have to draw it at an angle because it's laying flat. And then I've got to add my plant, and I'm going to do something where I cut off my little fake plant on the side of my page. So I'm kind of cropping my still life so that not everything is shown all the way. I'm just showing parts of this little plant. So I started with a little ellipse, or half my squished circle, and half of it isn't being shown. And then I added my little lip of the plant pot, and then I finished drawing the bottom of my potter right here. So then I'm going to start to add these funky shapes for my sedum. Sedum is another word for what this plant is supposed to be, although we talked about it, this is not a real plant. And that's not like me. Normally I only keep real plants, but in here there's not a lot of light. So then I'm adding these little lines to my sedum. And these are also irregular lines. They're organic shapes. They're not straight lines. They're funky and they have different light in them. And I can go in with my eraser and sort of clean up some of these sketchier lines that I've been adding, or maybe the ellipse of the circle shouldn't be shown anymore since I've got my plant going. And like I said, if I want to go over this later with a pen, I can, but for right now, I'm just going to stick with pencil. And then in the back of my still life, I've got my little picture frame. So since it is behind these other things, I have to stop where I see the other objects coming into view. And by that, I mean I only drew my line to as far as the sedum plant. And then I am going to stop when I get to the heart dish and try to close off my rectangle. So keep in mind, when things are up close to the viewer, they are bigger and they're more clear. When things are in the distance or behind, they're smaller and the lines don't overlap. They stop when other objects come in front of them to show where they are in space. And that's kind of a tricky thing to learn, and perspective is a challenge, but once you do learn about those little tricks and tips that help you, it really does become sort of like a fun challenge to create an illusion for the viewer. Okay, so I'm adding the frame, and it's just a rectangle right now, and I think that looks really boring. So I'm going to add the lines to show that this frame has a back. If it's just a rectangle, people don't see that it has space. If something is just a shape, it doesn't look like it stands anywhere in space. But if you add these tiny diagonal lines, the viewer can see that the picture goes back in space. So that's another trick. By adding diagonal lines, I'm sure when you doodled in middle school, or if you're in high school now, practicing creating shapes and making them look 3D is sort of like a fun thing to try. So now I'm just gonna kind of vaguely put in some of the details of that watercolor, and then I'm gonna write the quote and try to copy her handwriting. Be kind. I like the message of this. Whenever possible. Ooh, cracked my pencil. It is always possible. Okay. I'm just writing my quote of my little painting inside my still life. So actually, I do think that I'm going to start with colored pencils, and then once I'm done coloring, I can go on top with my black pen if I'd like to. It's harder to take black, you can't take black pen back. So I'm gonna leave that for the end and decide if that's still what I wanna do. So right now, I'm just gonna start by filling in some of these shapes with color. Color. So I'm gonna leave the pencil lines as they are because they kind of tell me where to go. I'm not gonna erase them. And I'm noticing that the edge of my sea glass is darker, so I'm pushing down really hard with my pencil. I'm sure most of you know that, but if you want to make your drawing utensils give you a darker line or shading, you push down hard. Where I want it to stay light, I don't push down very hard at all. So I'm just filling in that sea glass. And I'm using my colored pencil to show that the sea glass has multiple sides by darkening the outer edge. And that kind of helps show that. And maybe I can just shade in some spots to show that it's a little bit irregular. It's not perfect, it's a piece of glass. I'm gonna grab, I can't tell if this is purple or navy. I'm gonna grab my other colored pencils, do the same thing, start to fill in these irregular shapes. And with glass, you wanna show the shine. So I wanna show that part of this has light casted on it. So maybe I'm gonna go light in the middle and darker on the edges of this piece to show the viewer that this piece of sea glass is rounded. There's a curve. So when I'm coloring darker on the edge it gets really light in the middle and then darker on the other edge. And the light is casting right here. And maybe I want to use my white and add a little, try to add a little highlight. It's hard with colored pencils. This is more of like a blending tool. But that might actually come to help me as well. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add some more lines. I'm just sticking with colored pencil for now. And all these irregular pieces of glass are stacked on top. So it's kind of a challenge to draw these sea glass chunks and show the viewer really what it is they're looking at. But I like a good challenge. And drawing takes a lot of practice. I know that some friends get frustrated when they are drawing things in real life opposed to a picture. And what I tell my students is it takes so much practice. Drawing is a skill that you need to learn, just like playing the guitar or cooking. It is something that you have to work at. It doesn't just normally come naturally to people. So I'm adding a little brown. There's a brown chunk under here as well. I don't know what I'm going to make with this sea glass, but I'm excited for the challenge. I've got this is a clear piece of sea glass right here, so it makes it a little bit more challenging because I can't use white or it won't show up. So I'm using my black colored pencil to sort of outline this piece of sea glass, and then I'm going to add a little bit of shading around the edges to show the viewer that this piece is in fact clear. There's no color. And I'm just kind of doing some irregular lines around the edge of it. Show a little texture, show that it's weathered. Maybe I'll add a couple more speckles, just some of these pieces. And then in between these pieces of sea glass, I'm going to sort of use my black colored pencil to do a little shadow because they're stacked on top of each other. So there's a little bit of a shadow below them because the light can't get down there. So let's see, I have a couple more pieces. I'm just going to add a little bit more color to these. I've got another clear piece. So the viewer might look at this and never understand what I'm trying to draw is sea glass. They might think this is a piece of candy. They might think that they might not even have any idea what I'm trying to draw. And that's okay, because to me, it's more important that they're intrigued by what it is I'm drawing than looking at it and understanding, oh yeah, I know what that is. I know what I'm looking at. I don't know if that makes much sense, but that's what I'm interested in. Okay, my friends, so I've actually, when I look at my still life, and when you look in the camera, you can see that I've got this dark shadow below the heart-shaped dish, and I'm gonna draw that in real life in my journal because I want the viewer to see that there is a shadow below my ceramic dish because that sort of shows them where it sits in space. So to draw the shadow, I'm using my black colored pencil and I just mimic the shape of the object. So the line runs parallel to the shape of my object and I fill it in with my black colored pencil. And I don't want to push too hard because the shadow, I mean, it looks pretty dark in real life, but if you push too hard, it'll start to look like it's part of the object. Okay, so I don't want to go too much longer because we're starting to run out of time, but right now I'm just going to continue using my black. And when I go to color my pot of my plant, my pot is black as well, but I don't want to color the whole thing solid black because then, like I said with the shape, it will just look like flat. And shapes read flat in art. But when you want something to look like it has some depth, then you use a shading technique. So going from dark to light will show the viewer that no, this isn't a flat shape. This is a round thing with something in it. So I'm going really dark on the edge, going back and forth with my lines. And then I'm getting really light as I hit the corner of my page. It's almost like a highlight because so like I said, I went from dark to light to show the viewer that what they're looking at is not flat. And then I'm just going to go ahead and fill in some of these sedum leaves. And I'm going dark and outlining, and then I kind of fill it in with the same color. And you can switch up the colors. They don't need to be the same. Overlapping your colored pencils is a really good technique, and it makes your picture much more interesting. I highly recommend overlapping your colored pencils. So I just used almost like a teal colored pencil, and then I'm going to go in with my light green and add a little bit. Different color green, and maybe I want to fill in below, in between some of these leaves, so that the viewer understands that there's some shadows. And I can use my colored pencil and sort of outline some of these leaves as well. Cast a little shadow on some of these leaves. Okay. And then, so back here I've got my picture frame still, and I've got to fill in what's inside of it. So this picture frame is also black. So I'm going to go ahead and outline with my colored pencil. And then really lightly, I'm going to try to recreate that tiny little painting that I have in here. It's a lot of blues and it's very faint. But there's a lot of overlap because it's a watercolor painting. So there's a lot of mixing of colors that I want to try to recreate. But it doesn't have to be perfect. The point is to show the viewer the objects that I chose. I like overlapping colored pencils because you can create new colors opposed to just creating the colors that exist within your colored pencil selection. And then I'm definitely going to use my pen to go over some of these words because they're getting lost underneath my coloring. So if I want them to show, I'll make them pop with my pen that I will use after. Okay, so I outlined my frame so far, and I recreated the tiny little painting that I've got in my still life. And then lastly, I'm going to fill in this frame. So it's really dark in the front. I noticed that the shadow, it looks lighter on the sides that are turned. And that's because the light is hitting the sides. It's not hitting the front because of where it is. But it's definitely hitting the sides of the frame. If you would like to include drawing the surface that your objects are sitting on, that is up to you. It would probably help, otherwise they might look like they are floating in space. So creating that horizon line, I know it's not a landscape, but you can just add a horizon line to show, like I'll do right now, that these things are sitting on something. So you don't need to watch me color in this picture frame. However, I want you to think about whether or not you would like to create a border for your still life, or you could, it might be really interesting to write about the objects that you chose in these tiny little spaces surrounding your still life drawing. So what I mean by that is grab a pen or pencil and you could write, this little plant on my desk represents my love for growing plants in my life, or whatever it is that you chose. Just give a little 1 sentence or 2 sentence about what it is you chose to include in your still life. This is a really good skill to learn and practice if you want to get better at drawing. Drawing, like I said, does not come naturally. It's something you practice, and you have to continue looking at things in life and learning to draw from those objects in front of you. That is the only way that I think really helps to learn skills of realistic drawing, is observational drawing. I'm learning by observing my objects and practicing putting down those shapes on the page. So if you want to create a fun frame or border, I encourage you to try that. I hope you had fun, and I hope you learned something about observational drawing, and please continue sharing pictures with me because they are so much fun to see. Bye guys, see you next week.